Sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be the most real ones. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses as crazy or attention-seeking holds the key to saving lives. Sometimes a 12-year-old girl's whispered words in a hospital bed can trigger the most dangerous military operation on American soil. This is the story of Sarah Chun, a sixth grader from suburban Virginia whose family vacation to the mountains became a nightmare that no one believed. Not her parents, not the doctors, not the FBI, not even the local police who found her wandering barefoot on a highway at 3 a.m., speaking in broken sentences about underground rooms and men with accents she couldn't place. For 48 hours, Sarah was just another traumatized kid telling impossible stories. The kind of stories that make adults exchange worried glances and schedule therapy appointments. Stories about being taken from her family's cabin. Stories about other children who weren't as lucky as her. Stories about a place that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. Then Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez received a phone call that would change everything. A call that would send his SEAL team racing through the Virginia wilderness, following the fragmented memories of a girl nobody believed. A call that would prove that sometimes the most innocent voices carry the most devastating truths. What happened next would shake the foundations of how America protects its children, how it hunts its predators, and how it listens to the voices that society too often ignores. This is that story. The Virginia State Police cruiser's headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness along Route 211, illuminating the winding mountain road that stretched endlessly into the Shenandoah Valley. Officer Janet Mills had been patrolling these roads for 12 years, and she thought she had seen everything the mountains could throw at her. Drunk drivers, drug runners, the occasional bear wandering too close to civilization. But nothing had prepared her for what she would find at 3:17 a.m. on that October morning. The radio crackled with routine dispatches when her headlights caught something that made her slam on the brakes. There, walking along the shoulder of the highway, was a small figure in what appeared to be pajamas. A child, alone, in the middle of nowhere, moving with the mechanical gait of someone in shock. Officer Mills grabbed her radio and called it in before stepping out of her vehicle. The mountain air was crisp and cold, probably around 40 degrees. As she approached, her flashlight revealed a young Asian girl, maybe 12 years old, with long black hair matted with leaves and dirt. She was wearing pink pajamas that were torn and stained, and her bare feet were cut and bleeding from walking on the rough asphalt. "Hey there, sweetheart," Mills called out softly, not wanting to startle the child. "I'm Officer Mills. Are you okay? What's your name?" The girl stopped walking, but didn't turn around immediately. When she finally faced the officer, Mills felt her heart sink. The child's eyes held a hollow, distant look that Mills had only seen in war veterans and abuse victims. Those were not the eyes of a normal 12-year-old. "Sarah," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible above the mountain wind. "My name is Sarah Chun." Mills knelt down to the girl's eye level, noting the scratches on her arms and the way she flinched when a car passed by in the distance. "Sarah, I'm going to help you, okay? Can you tell me where your parents are? Do you know how you got here?" Sarah's response made Mills's blood run cold. "They took me from the cabin. There are others, in the rooms under the ground. You have to help them." Mills immediately radioed for backup and an ambulance, then gently guided Sarah to her patrol car. As they waited for help to arrive, Mills tried to get more information, but Sarah's story seemed to come in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror that didn't quite fit together. "We were at the cabin for vacation," Sarah said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Mom and Dad and my little brother Tommy. The cabin by Miller's Creek. I woke up and heard noises outside, voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. I looked out the window and saw men with flashlights." Mills took notes as Sarah spoke, though she was beginning to worry about the child's mental state. "What happened next, honey?" "They came inside. I tried to wake up Mom and Dad, but they wouldn't wake up. It was like they were sleeping too deep. The men, they spoke English but with accents. Russian, maybe? They put something over my face that smelled sweet, and then I woke up in a dark place." The ambulance arrived first, followed by 2 more patrol cars and a detective named Ray Hawkins. As the paramedics checked Sarah over, she continued her story, becoming more agitated as she spoke. There were other children there, she said, grabbing Officer Mills's hand tightly. In cages. Underground. They were crying and asking for their parents. Some of them had been there a long time. They forgot their real names. Detective Hawkins exchanged glances with Mills. Cases involving missing children were always priority, but Sarah's story had elements that seemed almost fantastical. Underground facilities with caged children, Russian accents, parents who wouldn't wake up. It sounded like the plot of a thriller movie rather than something that could happen in rural Virginia. At Shenandoah Valley Regional Medical Center, Sarah was examined by Dr. Patricia Nguyen, a pediatrician with 20 years of experience. The physical evidence was concerning, but not conclusive. Sarah had cuts and bruises consistent with running through wooded terrain, signs of dehydration, and what appeared to be injection sites on her arms. But there was no immediate evidence of sexual assault or severe physical abuse. The injection sites are puzzling, Dr. Nguyen explained to Detective Hawkins. They look professional, like someone with medical training administered whatever was injected. And her blood work shows traces of what appears to be a sedative, though it's nothing I recognize immediately. Meanwhile, Sarah's parents, David and Linda Chun, had been found at their rented cabin by park rangers. They were alive, but in a deep, unnatural sleep that took hours to break. When they finally woke up, they had no memory of the previous night's events and were frantic to find their daughter. The cabin showed signs of forced entry, but it had been professionally cleaned. There were no fingerprints, no obvious clues, nothing that would typically be left behind by amateur kidnappers. The only evidence that anything had happened was Sarah's absence and the strange, drug-induced sleep that had affected her parents. When the Chun family was reunited at the hospital, the emotional scene brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. Sarah clung to her parents as if she never intended to let them go, while her younger brother Tommy stared at his sister with wide, confused eyes. He remembered nothing after going to bed the previous evening. But as the hours passed and investigators tried to piece together Sarah's story, inconsistencies began to emerge. The location she described for the underground facility didn't match any known structures in the area. Her descriptions of the men who took her were vague and sometimes contradictory. Most concerning of all, no other children have been reported missing in the region. FBI agent Rebecca Martinez arrived from the Richmond field office that afternoon. She had extensive experience with child abduction cases and human trafficking, but even she found Sarah's account difficult to verify. The sophisticated nature of the operation Sarah described, the underground facility, the multiple children, these were elements typically associated with organized crime or international trafficking rings, not random kidnappings from mountain cabins. The girl has clearly been through something traumatic, Agent Martinez explained to the assembled team of investigators. The physical evidence supports that she was taken and held somewhere against her will. But the details of her story don't align with any known criminal operations in this area. Dr. Susan Walsh, a child psychiatrist brought in to evaluate Sarah, spent several hours with the girl. Her assessment was that Sarah was suffering from severe psychological trauma, but was not deliberately lying or fabricating her story. However, Dr. Walsh noted that traumatic experiences could sometimes cause memory distortions or the creation of false memories as a coping mechanism. Children who experience trauma sometimes create elaborate alternate narratives to help them process what happened. Dr. Walsh explained to Sarah's parents. It's possible that she was abducted and held somewhere, but her mind has embellished the details to make sense of something senseless. As the investigation continued, the story began to leak to the media. Local news stations picked up the story of the girl on the highway, and soon national media outlets were calling it a modern-day fairy tale with a happy ending. The narrative that emerged in the press was of a brave little girl who escaped from kidnappers and found her way to safety. But behind the scenes, investigators were growing increasingly skeptical. Ground-penetrating radar searches of the area Sarah described revealed nothing. Searches of abandoned buildings and caves in the region turned up no evidence of recent human activity. No other families reported missing children, despite Sarah's insistence that she had seen dozens of children in captivity. The Chun family faced intense scrutiny from both law enforcement and the media. Some investigators began to wonder if this was an elaborate hoax perpetrated by parents seeking attention or money. Others suggested that Sarah might have wandered off during the night and created the kidnapping story to avoid getting in trouble. David Chun, Sarah's father, became increasingly frustrated with the investigation's direction. "My daughter is not a liar," he told reporters. "Something terrible happened to her, and instead of finding the people responsible, everyone is acting like she made it all up." The breaking point came during Sarah's third interview with FBI agents. She had been answering the same questions for days, providing the same details about the underground facility, the other children, the men with accents. But under persistent questioning, small details in her story began to change. The color of the walls, the number of children, the specific words spoken by her captors. Agent Martinez noticed these inconsistencies and began to push harder. "Sarah, I need you to think very carefully. Are you sure there were other children? Are you sure about the underground rooms? Sometimes when we're scared, our imagination can play tricks on us." Sarah became increasingly agitated as the questions continued. She began to cry and then to scream, repeating over and over, "They're still there. The other kids are still there. Why won't you believe me?" The interview was terminated when Sarah became so distressed that she began hyperventilating. Dr. Walsh recommended that no further interviews be conducted without her present, and possibly not at all until Sarah had time to recover from her trauma. That evening, Detective Hawkins filed a report that effectively closed the active investigation. Without physical evidence, without any corroborating witnesses, without any similar cases in the area, the official conclusion was that Sarah Chun had been the victim of a brief abduction by unknown persons, possibly drug users or drifters, who had panicked and released her when they realized the scope of their crime. The case was filed under abduction with victim recovered, and the focus shifted to providing Sarah with psychological support and helping her family return to normal life. The underground facility with dozens of children became officially classified as a trauma-induced false memory. But late that night, as Officer Mills finished her shift and prepared to head home, she couldn't shake the image of Sarah's eyes from her memory. Those were not the eyes of a child who had made up a story. Those were the eyes of someone who had seen something terrible and felt utterly helpless because no one believed her. Mills made a decision that would later prove crucial. Instead of simply filing her report and moving on, she made copies of all her notes and began her own informal investigation. She started with the obvious question that everyone else seemed to have overlooked. If Sarah had made up the story, how had she known details about professional kidnapping techniques that even experienced investigators found impressively accurate? The official investigation might have been winding down, but Officer Mills was just getting started. And unknown to anyone at that time, her persistence would soon attract the attention of someone who understood exactly what Sarah Chun had experienced and why no one believed her story. In a secure office building in Virginia Beach, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez was reading through daily intelligence briefings when a particular news story caught his attention. It was a small item about a child found on a highway in Virginia, claiming to have escaped from an underground facility where other children were being held captive. Most people would have dismissed it as another strange news story. But Rodriguez had seen too much in his 15 years with Naval Special Warfare to dismiss anything too quickly. He picked up his phone and made a call to an old contact in the FBI. It was time to take a closer look at the girl nobody believed. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts long before he ever earned his SEAL Trident. Growing up in East Los Angeles, survival often depended on recognizing when something didn't feel right, even when everything appeared normal on the surface. That same instinct had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and countless classified operations that would never appear in any official record. Now, sitting in his office at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, Rodriguez stared at the newspaper article about Sarah Chun for the 3rd time. The girl's story had too many specific details that rang true to his experienced ear. The professional cleanup of the crime scene, the sophisticated sedatives used on the parents, the underground facility designed to hold multiple captives. These weren't the hallmarks of random criminals or opportunistic predators. They were the signature of organized, well-funded operations. Rodriguez had encountered similar operations during his time with SEAL Team 6, human trafficking networks that operated with military precision, complete with underground facilities, professional medical support, and international connections. Most Americans believed such things only happened in foreign countries, in places torn apart by war or controlled by cartels. But Rodriguez knew better. He knew that some of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises had found ways to operate within the United States, hidden beneath layers of legitimate businesses and protected by corruption that reached surprising levels of government. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a year. Special Agent Diana Foster answered on the second ring. "Foster, Diana, it's Marcus Rodriguez. I need to ask you about a case in Virginia. A girl named Sarah Chun." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Foster and Rodriguez had worked together on several joint operations, including a mission that had disrupted a trafficking ring operating out of Eastern Europe. She knew that when Rodriguez called about something, it was worth paying attention to. The highway girl? "Marcus, that case has been essentially closed. The girl was traumatized and created false memories. It happens more than you'd think. What if it doesn't happen as much as you think? What if she's telling the truth?" Rodriguez could hear Foster moving papers around on her desk. "Marcus, we investigated this thoroughly. No physical evidence. No corroborating witnesses. No other missing children. The girl's story changes every time she tells it. Or maybe," Rodriguez said carefully, "her story changes because she's a 12-year-old kid who witnessed something so traumatic that her mind is protecting her from the full memory. Maybe the reason you can't find evidence is because whoever is running this operation is better at covering their tracks than your average criminal." Foster was quiet for a long moment. She had worked enough cases with Rodriguez to know that his hunches often led to breakthrough discoveries. But she also knew the political reality of the FBI. Resources were limited, and cases that couldn't be proven were quickly set aside in favor of cases that could be prosecuted successfully. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marcus?" "I'm suggesting that someone with experience in counter-trafficking operations should take a fresh look at this case. Someone who understands how these networks operate and what to look for. And you think that someone should be you?" Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "I think that if there's even a chance this girl is telling the truth, then every day we wait is another day those other children spend in hell." 3 hours later, Rodriguez was on a military helicopter heading toward Virginia. He had convinced his commanding officer to allow him to take a few days of personal leave to visit family in the area. It wasn't entirely a lie. Rodriguez had grown up with foster families throughout the Southwest and had learned early that sometimes family meant the people who needed your help, not just the people who shared your blood. His first stop was the Shenandoah Valley Regional Medical Center, where he hoped to speak with Dr. Nguyen, the pediatrician who had examined Sarah. Rodriguez had learned that medical professionals often noticed details that law enforcement missed, particularly when it came to evidence of systematic abuse or professional medical procedures. Dr. Nguyen was initially reluctant to discuss Sarah's case with someone who wasn't officially part of the investigation. But when Rodriguez explained his background and his concerns about organized trafficking, her attitude changed significantly. "You're the first person who's asked me about the injection sites," she said, leading Rodriguez to her office. Everyone else focused on looking for evidence of sexual assault or obvious physical abuse. What was unusual about the injection sites? Dr. Nguyen pulled out Sarah's medical file and pointed to several photographs. "Look at these. Perfect puncture wounds, no bruising around the injection site, placed in locations that would provide optimal drug absorption while minimizing visible marks. This isn't someone jabbing a needle into a struggling child. This is someone with medical training who has done this many times before." Rodriguez studied the photos with growing concern. He had seen similar injection patterns in victims rescued from trafficking operations overseas. What about the drugs themselves? Any idea what was used? "That's where it gets really interesting," Dr. Nguyen said, opening another file. The blood work showed traces of what appears to be a custom pharmaceutical cocktail. Not street drugs, not over-the-counter medications. Someone with access to laboratory-grade equipment created a specific blend designed to keep someone compliant, but not unconscious. How specific? Specific enough that I sent samples to a colleague at Johns Hopkins who specializes in forensic pharmacology. She's never seen this exact combination before, but she said it would require someone with advanced knowledge of neuropharmacology to create it. Rodriguez felt his instincts sharpening. Everything Dr. Nguyen was describing pointed to a professional operation with significant resources. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a business. His next stop was the Chun family's hotel, where they were staying while deciding whether to return home to suburban Virginia or relocate somewhere that felt safer. David and Linda Chen agreed to meet with Rodriguez after he explained his military background and his experience with trafficking cases. Sarah was initially shy around Rodriguez, staying close to her mother while he spoke with her parents. But as he demonstrated his genuine interest in her story and his belief that something terrible had really happened to her, she began to open up. "Tell me about the other children," Rodriguez said gently, kneeling down to Sarah's eye level in the hotel room. Not their names or exactly how many there were, but how they acted. What did they seem like they were feeling? Sarah's eyes focused with a clarity that had been missing in her previous interviews. They were scared, but not surprise scared. Like they had been scared for so long that they forgot what it felt like to not be scared. Some of the older ones took care of the younger ones. Like they were trying to be brave, even though they were just kids too. Rodriguez nodded, making mental notes. This behavior pattern was consistent with children who had been in captivity for extended periods. It showed adaptation and hierarchy formation, which didn't happen in short-term kidnapping situations. What about the place itself? Did it feel like it was built just to keep children, or like it might have been used for other things too? It was built for kids, Sarah said without hesitation. Everything was the right size. The beds, the doors, even the bathrooms. But it wasn't built to make kids happy. It was built to keep kids. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Sarah's parents. This level of detail suggested either an incredibly sophisticated false memory or genuine experience in a purpose-built facility. And purpose-built facilities represented significant investments of time, money, and planning. "Sarah, this is really important. Do you remember anything about how you got out? How you escaped?" Sarah frowned, concentrating hard. "I remember someone helping me. Not one of the men who worked there. Someone different. They spoke English without an accent, and they knew the way out. They told me to run to the road and not stop running until I found help." This was new information. In all the previous interviews, Sarah had said she couldn't remember exactly how she had escaped. The emergence of this detail wasn't necessarily evidence of false memory creation. Trauma victims often recovered memories gradually as they felt safer talking about their experiences. "Can you remember anything about this person who helped you?" "It was dark, but I think it was a woman. She seemed like she knew the place, but she didn't work there. She was trying to be quiet so the other men wouldn't hear her." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. This suggested the possibility of either an insider who had decided to help or someone else who had infiltrated the facility. Either option pointed to a complex situation that was far beyond what local law enforcement was equipped to handle. That evening, Rodriguez called Agent Foster from his hotel room. "Diana, I need you to run some database searches for me. Look for any unusual pharmaceutical thefts in the past 6 months, particularly items that could be used to create custom sedatives. Also check for any missing persons reports involving children that mention underground locations or international accents. Marcus, are you actually investigating this case? Because if you are, you need to coordinate with the local FBI office. I'm just following up on some inconsistencies that caught my attention. Humor me on the searches." 2 hours later, Foster called back with information that made Rodriguez sit up straight. "Marcus, we've got problems. I found at least 6 missing children cases in the past year that have elements similar to Sarah Chen's story. Different states, different jurisdictions, so no one connected them before." "What kind of elements?" "Underground locations mentioned by children who were found and later recanted their stories. Professional-grade sedatives that couldn't be identified. Families who experienced unexplained periods of deep sleep. And, Marcus, here's the really disturbing part. In 3 of these cases, the children who reported these details later disappeared again within months of being found." Rodriguez felt his blood run cold. They were taken again. Officially, they were recorded as runaways. But the timing is too coincidental. These were kids who had been traumatized by their first experience. They wouldn't have run away from their families voluntarily. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. That's what I'm thinking. And if that's true, then Sarah Chun is in danger just for telling her story. Rodriguez hung up the phone and immediately called the hotel's front desk. He arranged to have his room moved to one directly across the hall from the Chun family's room. Then he called his team leader and requested emergency leave to handle a family crisis. If Sarah Chun was telling the truth, then she had escaped from an operation that was sophisticated enough to retrieve witnesses who talked too much. And if that was the case, then every day she remained visible and unprotected was a day closer to her disappearance. Rodriguez had made a career out of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Tonight, that meant a 12-year-old girl whose story no one believed, but whose life might depend on someone taking her seriously. As he settled in for what he expected to be a sleepless night of surveillance, Rodriguez reflected on how often the most important missions started with the smallest clues. A girl on a highway at 3 a.m., a story that seemed too elaborate to be true. Medical evidence that pointed to professional operations. Missing children whose cases had been written off as resolved. Tomorrow, he would begin putting together a picture that local law enforcement had been unable or unwilling to see. He would start connecting dots that spread across multiple states and jurisdictions. And if he was right about what he was beginning to suspect, then Sarah Chin's rescue hadn't been the end of the story. It had been just the beginning. Outside the hotel, a van with tinted windows sat in the parking lot. The occupants had been watching the Chun family's room since early evening, waiting for the right moment to complete their assignment. But they had not anticipated the arrival of a Navy SEAL who understood exactly what they were planning. Rodriguez spotted the van during his first security sweep of the hotel perimeter. The license plate was registered to a shell company that had existed for less than 6 months. The vehicle's occupants showed signs of professional surveillance training. And most importantly, they were focused on the wrong hotel room. They were watching the Chun family's original room, not knowing that Rodriguez had arranged for the family to be moved to a different floor entirely. It was a small advantage, but in Rodriguez's experience, small advantages often made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The game of cat and mouse was about to begin, and for the first time since a rescue, Sarah Chun had someone watching over her who understood the stakes involved. Rodriguez spent the night moving between his hotel room and strategic observation points throughout the building, tracking the surveillance team that was watching the Chin family. He had identified at least 3 individuals working in shifts, using professional communication equipment, and displaying the kind of patience that suggested military or intelligence training. These were not local criminals or opportunistic predators. These were specialists sent to handle a specific problem. At 0300 hours, Rodriguez made a decision that would escalate the situation beyond anything local law enforcement was prepared to handle. He photographed the license plates of all suspicious vehicles in the area, documented the faces of the surveillance team members using a telephoto lens, and sent the information through encrypted channels to SEAL Team 6 intelligence officer. The response came back within 2 hours and confirmed Rodriguez's worst fears. 2 of the men he had photographed were former military contractors with connections to Eastern European security firms. One had an arrest record in Romania for human trafficking, though charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. The other had been investigated by Interpol for involvement in organ trafficking networks operating out of Moldova. This was no longer a local crime story. This was an international operation with the resources to track down escaped victims and eliminate them as threats. And Sarah Chun had stumbled into the middle of it. Rodriguez called Agent Foster on a secure line at 0530 hours. Diana, we need to move the family immediately. The people watching them are not local law enforcement, and they're not here to ask questions. Marcus, I can't authorize protective custody based on your surveillance of people sitting in a parking lot. Then, don't authorize it officially. But if you want Sarah Chun to be alive tomorrow, you need to get her and her family out of that hotel within the next few hours. Foster's silence told Rodriguez that she was beginning to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. What exactly are you proposing? Unofficial protective custody. Move them to a safe house while we develop enough evidence to bring in a federal task force. Give me 72 hours to prove that Sarah's story connects to something bigger than anyone realized. And if you can't prove it in 72 hours, then we return them to their normal lives and hope I was wrong about everything. Foster made the call to her supervisor, who made a call to his supervisor, who eventually signed off on a 48-hour protective detail for the Chun family under the auspices of investigating potential witness intimidation. It wasn't much, but it bought Rodriguez the time he needed to dig deeper. By noon, the Chun family had been moved to a bureau safe house in Fairfax County. Sarah seemed to understand instinctively that something important was happening, though her parents remained confused about why federal agents were suddenly treating their daughter's case as a high priority. Rodriguez used the time to make contact with Officer Mills, the Virginia State Police officer who had originally found Sarah. Mills had been conducting her own informal investigation and had discovered several pieces of information that had been overlooked by the official investigation. I've been mapping missing persons reports in a 300-mile radius of where I found Sarah, Mills explained, spreading papers across the conference table at the Fairfax County Sheriff's Office. Look at this pattern. The map showed dozens of pins representing missing children cases over the past 2 years. At first glance, they seemed randomly distributed across Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland. But when Mills highlighted specific types of cases, children who had disappeared from rural vacation areas, families who had experienced unexplained periods of unconsciousness, witnesses who had described underground facilities, a clear geographic cluster emerged. They're all within a day's drive of the Shenandoah Valley, Rodriguez observed, and they're all in areas with extensive cave systems or abandoned mining operations. That's what I thought too, Mills said. So I started researching property ownership in the area. Corporate shells, holding companies, any large land purchases in the past 5 years that might be connected to development of underground facilities. Mills pulled out another set of documents that made Rodriguez's blood pressure spike. 3 different shell companies had purchased over 2,000 acres of land in the region, all within the past 18 months. The purchases had been structured to avoid drawing attention from local authorities, with each parcel bought through a different corporate entity. But when Mills traced the ownership backwards through layers of holding companies, all 3 purchases ultimately connected to the same source, a consortium of international investors with registered offices in countries known for weak financial oversight. This is money laundering disguised as real estate investment, Rodriguez said, studying the ownership documents. Someone with serious resources has been planning this operation for years. Mills nodded grimly. It gets worse. I contacted local contractors who have worked in the area, asking about any unusual construction projects. 3 different companies mentioned being hired to do specialized concrete work on agricultural projects that required them to sign unusually strict confidentiality agreements. What kind of concrete work? Underground storage facilities, ventilation systems, electrical work designed for subterranean installations. Each contractor only worked on small pieces of the project, so none of them understood what they were building. But when you put all their work together, Mills spread out construction diagrams that she had recreated based on contractor interviews. The final picture showed a sophisticated underground complex with multiple levels, independent power and water systems, and security features that could contain dozens of people indefinitely. Rodriguez stared at the diagrams with growing horror. This wasn't a hastily constructed prison. This was a purpose-built facility designed to house and process human trafficking victims with the efficiency of a factory. The level of planning and investment suggested an operation with international scope and government-level resources. We need to find this place, Rodriguez said, and we need to find it before they realize how much we know. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Nguyen called Rodriguez that afternoon with news from her colleague at Johns Hopkins. The pharmaceutical analysis of Sarah's blood work had yielded a crucial clue. One of the compounds found in her system was so specialized that it was only manufactured by a single laboratory in the United States. The compound is called Neurocom-7, Dr. Nguyen explained. It's an experimental drug designed for use in pediatric surgery to maintain patient compliance while allowing limited consciousness. Only 3 medical institutions in the country have legal access to it, and they have to account for every dose. Rodriguez immediately contacted Agent Foster with the information. Within 4 hours, FBI agents were interviewing administrators at all 3 institutions that had access to Neurocom 7. 2 of the facilities had perfect accounting for their supplies. The third facility, a private research clinic in Charlottesville, Virginia, reported that they had discovered a clerical error in their inventory just 2 weeks earlier. Someone with legitimate access to their pharmacy had been systematically stealing small amounts of controlled substances over several months. The clinic's employment records revealed that Dr. Viktor Kozlov, an anesthesiologist with previous experience at military hospitals in Eastern Europe, had resigned abruptly the same week that Sarah Chun was found on the highway. His forwarding address was listed as a post office box that turned out to be registered under a false name. "We've got our first real lead," Foster told Rodriguez over a secure phone line. Kozlov's financial records show large cash deposits that don't match his declared income. His apartment was cleaned out professionally. No fingerprints, no personal items, no evidence that anyone had ever lived there. Where did the money come from? That's where it gets interesting. The deposits were always made in cash, but security cameras at the bank show Kozlov making the deposits himself. And here's the crucial detail. He was always accompanied by the same person, a woman who matches Sarah's description of someone who helped her escape. Rodriguez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. She's been working inside the operation, either as a victim who gained their trust or as an insider who turned against them. Either way, she's our best hope of finding the facility before they shut it down and move the operation. The search for the mystery woman led to a review of security camera footage from dozens of locations around Charlottesville and the surrounding area. FBI facial recognition software eventually identified her as Elena Petrov, a former medical student who had disappeared from a university in Kiev 3 years earlier. According to Interpol records, she had been kidnapped while traveling through Romania and was believed to have been sold into human trafficking. But Elena Petrov hadn't remained a victim. Somewhere along the line, she had found a way to work within the system while secretly gathering information about the operation's structure and methods. Her decision to help Sarah escape had been the first crack in an otherwise impenetrable network. "We need to find her," Rodriguez told Foster. "She's the key to locating the facility and understanding how this operation works." The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Officer Mills called Rodriguez at 1800 hours with news that made him grab his keys and head for the door. "I've been monitoring police radio traffic in the area where Sarah was found," Mills explained. 20 minutes ago, state police responded to a report of a woman walking on Route 211, about 5 miles from where I found Sarah. The description matches your Elena Petrov. Rodriguez was in his vehicle and racing toward the location before Mills finished speaking. If Elena Petrov was back in the area, it meant one of 2 things. Either she had escaped from the operation again, or she was leading her handlers to anyone who might be investigating the network. The Virginia State Police had Elena in custody when Rodriguez arrived, but she was refusing to speak to anyone except the military man who understands what Sarah Chun experienced. Word of Rodriguez's unofficial investigation had apparently reached her through channels he didn't understand. Elena Petrov looked older than her 24 years, with the careful alertness of someone who had survived terrible experiences through intelligence and careful planning. When Rodriguez entered the interview room, she studied him with the same assessing gaze he had seen in former prisoners of war. "You are the Navy SEAL who is protecting the Chinese girl," she said in heavily accented English. "They told me you would not believe her story like the others." "They? Who told you that?" "The other children. We have ways of communicating that our captors do not understand. When Sarah escaped, we knew someone would come looking for answers. We have been waiting." Rodriguez leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. "How many children are we talking about, Elena?" 37 children in the primary facility. 8 adults who were taken as adolescents and have been there so long they help manage the younger ones. And 12 infants who were born in captivity. The numbers hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. This wasn't just a trafficking operation. This was a multi-generational prison designed to produce victims who had never known freedom. "Elena, where is this facility? How do we get the children out?" Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out a hand-drawn map that was so detailed it looked like it had been created by a professional surveyor. I had been planning this for 2 years. Every tunnel, every guard post, every camera. I know their schedules, their weaknesses, their escape routes. She spread the map on the interview table, revealing a complex that was far larger than anything Rodriguez had imagined. The facility extended through natural cave systems that had been expanded and reinforced with multiple levels connected by both natural passages and constructed tunnels. The security setup included motion sensors, infrared cameras, and armed guards posted at strategic choke points. "This is a fortress," Rodriguez said, studying the layout. "It would take a significant force to assault this place successfully. Which is why we do not assault it," Elena said with a slight smile. "We use the same tunnels they use to expand a facility. I know 3 entrances that are not guarded because they do not appear on the official blueprints. Natural cave openings that they blocked from the inside, but did not monitor electronically." Rodriguez stared at the map, beginning to see the possibilities. This wasn't just intelligence about a criminal operation. This was a complete tactical assessment created by someone who had been planning a rescue operation for months. "Elena, why didn't you escape sooner? Why did you wait until now?" Her expression darkened. "Because they told us that any child who escaped would be hunted down and killed along with their entire family. Sarah was brave enough to try, but I knew they would send teams to silence her. I stayed to gather intelligence and wait for someone with the resources to fight back. And you think I have those resources?" Elena met his gaze directly. "You are here. You believed Sarah's story when no one else would. You found me when I needed to be found. You have the training to go into that place and bring out the children who cannot escape on their own." Rodriguez realized that everything that had happened since Sarah Chan was found on the highway had been leading to this moment. The investigation, the surveillance, the discovery of the network. All of it had been orchestrated by a former medical student who had spent 2 years planning the most important rescue operation of his career. "Elena, if we do this, there's no guarantee that any of us will survive. These people have killed to protect this operation before. The children in that facility are already dead," Elena said quietly. "They are just waiting for their bodies to catch up with their spirits. If we do nothing, they will never see sunlight again. If we try and fail, at least they will know that someone cared enough to try." Rodriguez picked up his phone and called Agent Foster. It was time to activate resources that went far beyond local law enforcement. It was time to bring in the kind of people who specialized in making impossible rescues look routine. "Diana, I need you to contact Joint Special Operations Command. Tell them we have actionable intelligence on a domestic trafficking operation that requires immediate tactical response." "Marcus, are you sure about this? Once we make that call, there's no going back." Rodriguez looked at Elena Petrov's map, thinking about 37 children who had been waiting for someone to care enough to find them. There was no going back the moment Sarah Chun told her story. We just didn't realize it yet. The war room at Quantico buzzed with controlled intensity as federal agents, military personnel, and medical specialists studied Elena Petrov's intelligence for the 3rd time in 6 hours. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, Joint Special Operations Command's deputy director, had authorized the largest domestic counter-trafficking operation in U.S. history based on the testimony of a girl nobody believed and the intelligence gathered by a woman who had spent 2 years planning from inside hell. Rodriguez stood beside Elena as she walked the assembled team through every detail of the facility's layout. Her English had improved dramatically as she focused on technical details, revealing the medical education that had made her valuable to her captors as well as dangerous to their operation. "The main holding area is here." Elena pointed to the largest chamber on her hand-drawn map. "Natural cave system, reinforced with concrete and steel. 47 individual cells, each designed for one child, but often holding 2 or 3. The children here are new arrivals, usually held for 2 to 4 weeks while they're broken down psychologically." General Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of the FBI's hostage rescue team, studied the tactical challenges. "What about guards? How many armed personnel?" "Minimum of 6 at all times, maximum of 12 during shift changes. They work in pairs and carry radio communication devices, but the signal is poor in the deeper parts of the facility due to the rock formations. If you can take out the communication hub here," Elena pointed to a smaller chamber. You can isolate guard teams from each other. Rodriguez had been working with the intelligence team to verify Elena's information through satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar. Everything she had told them checked out with disturbing accuracy. The thermal signatures detected by overhead surveillance matched her descriptions of populated areas within the facility. Electromagnetic monitoring had detected the radio communications network she described. Elena, tell them about the medical facility, Rodriguez said, knowing this would be the detail that convinced any remaining skeptics. Elena's expression darkened as she pointed to a section of the map that showed a series of smaller chambers connected by narrow corridors. This is where they keep the children who have been there longest, some for over 3 years. They receive medical care here, but also psychological conditioning designed to make them compliant and dependent on their captors. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the FBI's chief psychologist for trafficking cases, leaned forward. What kind of conditioning? Systematic destruction of their sense of individual identity. They are given numbers instead of names. They are punished for expressing emotional attachment to each other. They are rewarded for reporting on other children's disloyal behavior. Over time, many of them begin to see their captors as protectors rather than enemies. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a deprogramming mission that would require months or years of specialized treatment for every child they brought out. There's something else, Elena continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The breeding program. General Hayes looked up sharply. Explain. 12 children under the age of 5 who were born in the facility. Their mothers are girls who were captured as adolescents and have been there so long that they see the facility as their home. The children have never seen the outside world. They do not know that any other way of life exists. Rodriguez felt his jaw clench as he considered the psychological complexity of rescuing children who would be terrified by freedom. These weren't just victims. They were an entire generation that had been systematically programmed to fear the outside world. Admiral Mitchell stood up, signaling that the planning phase was over. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get those children out of there. The question is how we do it without getting any of them killed in the process. The tactical plan that emerged over the next 8 hours was unlike anything Rodriguez had ever participated in. Instead of a single assault force, the operation would use 3 separate teams approaching through different cave entrances simultaneously. Each team would have specific objectives designed to minimize the chance of armed confrontation while maximizing the speed of victim extraction. Team Alpha, led by Rodriguez, would enter through the natural cave opening that Elena had identified as the least monitored. Their objective was to reach the communication hub and neutralize the facility's ability to coordinate resistance or call for outside support. Team Bravo, commanded by General Hayes herself, would assault the main entrance while Team Alpha disabled communications. Their job was to draw attention and resources away from the areas where children were being held. Team Charlie, composed primarily of FBI agents with specialized training in victim extraction, would enter through a third entrance and begin evacuating children while the other teams engaged security forces. Elena would accompany Team Alpha as a guide, despite strong objections from FBI personnel who worried about using a civilian in such a dangerous operation. She had made it clear that without her knowledge of the facility's hidden passages and security protocols, the mission would have a much lower probability of success. "I have been planning this for 2 years," she told Admiral Mitchell during a private briefing. "I know which children will panic and which ones will help calm the others. I know which guards can be reasoned with and which ones will fight to the death. You need me in there." The medical component of the operation was equally complex. Dr. Sarah Williams, one of the country's leading experts in treating trafficking victims, had assembled a team of pediatric specialists, trauma counselors, and child psychologists who would be waiting at a temporary treatment facility established at Quantico. "We have to be prepared for children who have been systematically taught to distrust authority figures," Dr. Williams explained to the assembled team. "Some of them may resist rescue attempts because they've been conditioned to believe that anyone who claims to want to help them is lying." Rodriguez spent the night before the operation reviewing intelligence reports and trying not to think about all the ways the mission could go catastrophically wrong. The facility's security was sophisticated enough to pose a serious threat to even experienced special operations personnel. The children they were trying to rescue might not want to be rescued. And if the operation failed, there was a good chance that the trafficking network would simply kill all the witnesses and disappear. At 0200 hours, Rodriguez met with his team for final equipment checks and mission briefing. The 8-person unit included specialists in cave warfare, electronic surveillance, and close-quarters combat. Each member had been selected for their ability to operate effectively in confined spaces while minimizing the risk of collateral damage. Elena arrived dressed in tactical gear that had been specially fitted for her small frame. She carried no weapons but had been equipped with communication devices and emergency medical supplies. Her job was to guide the team through the facility's hidden passages while providing real-time intelligence about guard positions and civilian locations. "Remember," Rodriguez told his team as they loaded into vehicles for the drive to the insertion point, "we are not going in there to fight a war. We're going in there to save children. Every decision you make, every shot you fire, every move you take has to be evaluated through that lens." The cave entrance that Elena had selected was located in a densely wooded area about 3 miles from the facility's main entrance. Natural rock formations provided concealment from aerial observation, while the underground approach would allow Rodriguez's team to bypass most of the external security measures. At 0430 hours, Team Alpha began their descent into the cave system. Elena led the way through passages that were barely wide enough for a single person, using hand signals to communicate in the absolute darkness. The team moved in single file, each member maintaining physical contact with the person in front of them to avoid becoming separated in the maze of underground tunnels. 30 minutes into the infiltration, Elena held up her hand and pointed to a narrow opening in the cave wall. Through the gap, Rodriguez could see artificial lighting and hear the faint sound of mechanical ventilation systems. They had reached the facility. Elena slipped through the opening first, followed by Rodriguez and the rest of his team. They emerged into a service corridor that connected to the main facility's power and communication systems. According to Elena's intelligence, this area was patrolled once every 4 hours, and the next patrol wasn't due for another 90 minutes. The communication hub was located 50 meters down the corridor, behind a steel door that would require specialized equipment to breach quietly. Rodriguez's demolitions expert began preparing shaped charges that would destroy the door's locking mechanism while minimizing noise that might alert guards in other parts of the facility. As his team worked, Rodriguez used his radio to check in with the other assault teams. Team Bravo was in position at the main entrance, waiting for Team Alpha to disable communications before beginning their diversionary assault. Team Charlie had reached their insertion point, but was waiting for Rodriguez's signal before entering the facility. Elena stood beside Rodriguez, studying a handheld device that showed the facility's electrical systems. "The power grid is more sophisticated than I expected," she whispered. "They have backup generators and isolated circuits for critical systems. Even if you destroy the main communication hub, they may still be able to coordinate resistance." Rodriguez nodded, considering their options. The mission plan had included contingencies for exactly this situation, but implementing them would require splitting his already small team and increasing the risk to everyone involved. "Can you guide 2 of my people to the backup systems while the rest of us take the primary target?" Elena studied the facility layout in her mind. "Yes, but the backup systems are located near the medical facility where the longest-term prisoners are kept. Any noise or disturbance in that area might cause panic among children who have been conditioned to fear any change in routine." Rodriguez made the decision that would define the rest of the operation. "We'll risk it. The children's long-term safety is more important than their short-term comfort." He split his team, sending his electronic specialist and 1 combat operator with Elena to disable the backup systems while he led the remaining team members against the primary communication hub. Both teams would have to complete their objectives within the next 20 minutes to maintain the element of surprise. The assault on the communication hub went exactly as planned. Rodriguez's demolitions expert breached the steel door with minimal noise, and the team was inside the facility's nerve center within seconds. 3 guards were present, but they were neutralized with non-lethal weapons before they could raise an alarm. Within 5 minutes, every communication system in the facility had been destroyed or disabled. Elena's mission to the backup systems proved more complicated. As she had predicted, their approach took them through areas where children were being held. Rodriguez could hear her voice over the radio, speaking in multiple languages as she tried to calm frightened children who had been awakened by the sounds of people moving through corridors they had never seen used before. "This is Elena." Her voice came over the radio in a whisper. "I have reached the backup systems, but there are complications. Some of the older children recognize me and are asking questions. They want to know if this is a real rescue or another psychological test." Rodriguez felt his heart sink as he realized the depth of trauma they were dealing with. These children had been so systematically abused that they couldn't believe rescue was possible even when it was happening in front of them. "Elena, disable the systems and get your team out of there. We'll deal with the children's questions when we have the facility secured." "Negative," Elena responded firmly. "These children have been waiting for rescue for years. I am not going to disappoint them again by running away at the first sign of complications." Rodriguez heard the sound of Elena's voice over the radio as she began speaking to the children in rapid, urgent tones. She was explaining what was happening, who the armed men were, and why they needed to stay calm and follow instructions. Her voice carried an authority born of shared suffering and genuine care for their welfare. 5 minutes later, Elena's team reported that the backup systems had been disabled and that the children in that section of the facility were ready for evacuation. But Elena had made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of the operation. "This is Elena. I am staying with the children in Medical Section 3. They are too traumatized to trust anyone they do not know, and if you try to move them without someone they trust, they will panic and potentially alert guards in other sections." Rodriguez realized that Elena had just volunteered to become a hostage to her own rescue operation. If anything went wrong, if the guards discovered what was happening before all the children could be evacuated, Elena would be trapped in the most heavily monitored section of the facility with no easy escape route. But he also realized that she was right. These children had been programmed to distrust strangers, especially authority figures with guns and tactical equipment. Elena was their only link to the outside world, the only person who could convince them that this rescue was real. Rodriguez keyed his radio and gave the signal that would commit all 3 teams to full assault mode. "All units, this is Alpha Leader. Communications are down and the facility is isolated. Begin immediate victim extraction. We have children ready for evacuation in Medical Section 3, and we have a civilian guide who is staying with traumatized victims until they could be safely moved." The response that came back from General Hayes was immediate and clear. "Copy that, Alpha Leader. We're going in. Bring our people home." Rodriguez and his team began moving through the facility toward their assigned evacuation routes. But as they advanced through corridors that Elena had mapped with perfect accuracy, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of the mission was just beginning. They had found the children, but now they had to convince them that freedom was something they were allowed to want. Rodriguez moved through the facility's corridors with his team, following Elena's precise maps toward the main holding area where most of the children were kept. The silence was unnervingly complete. Their destruction of the communication systems had been so thorough that even the guards seemed unaware that anything unusual was happening. The first indication of resistance came from Team Bravo's radio report. General Hayes' diversionary assault on the main entrance had encountered more heavily armed opposition than expected. "Alpha Leader, be advised that we have engaged at least 8 hostiles with automatic weapons and professional training. This is not the lightweight security operation we anticipated." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as he realized the implications. If the facility's security was more sophisticated than Elena had observed, it meant there were aspects of the operation that even she hadn't discovered during her 2 years of intelligence gathering. They might be walking into a trap that was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. But before he could adjust the mission plan, Elena's voice came over the radio with an urgency that made everyone freeze. "Alpha Leader, I need immediate assistance in Medical Section 3. The children here are not responding to evacuation procedures. Several of them are having severe psychological breaks, and I think some of the older victims are actively trying to prevent younger children from leaving. Rodriguez split his team again, sending half his personnel toward the main holding area while he personally responded to Elena's emergency. As he moved through the facility's medical section, he began to understand the true horror of what they were dealing with. The children in Medical Section 3 were not just victims of trafficking. They were the products of a systematic psychological destruction program that had turned some of them into active participants in their own imprisonment. Rodriguez found Elena surrounded by 12 children ranging in age from 8 to 16, several of who were physically restraining younger children who were trying to follow her toward the exit. They believe that leaving the facility will result in punishment that is worse than staying here, Elena explained quickly. The older ones have been conditioned to protect the younger ones by keeping them compliant with facility rules. Rodriguez knelt down to speak with Maria, a 14-year-old girl who had been in the facility for over 3 years according to Elena's intelligence. Maria spoke English with a slight accent that suggested she had been taken from somewhere in the American Southwest. Maria, my name is Marcus. I'm here to take you and the other children to a safe place where you'll be with people who care about you. Maria's response chilled Rodriguez to the bone. Sir, thank you for your concern, but we are safe here. The administrators take care of us as long as we follow the rules. If we leave without permission, they will be very disappointed in us. We don't want to disappoint them. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Elena, who nodded grimly. This was the most insidious aspect of long-term psychological conditioning. The victims became invested in maintaining the system that oppressed them because they had been taught to see it as protection rather than prison. Maria, the administrators can't hurt you anymore. My friends, and I have made sure of that. We're here to take you to a place where you can make your own choices about what you want to do. But Maria shook her head firmly. Making our own choices is what got us in trouble in the first place. The administrators help us make good choices. Without them, we would make mistakes that would hurt us. Rodriguez realized that simply evacuating these children would be tantamount to kidnapping them from their own perspective. They had been so thoroughly conditioned that rescue felt like assault. He made a decision that went against every tactical principle he had learned in 15 years of special operations. He sat down on the floor of the medical facility and began talking to the children as individuals rather than evacuation targets. He asked them about their daily routines, their fears, their hopes for the future. He listened to their stories about how the administrators had saved them from lives of chaos and uncertainty. Elena translated when necessary, but Rodriguez quickly discovered that most of the children spoke multiple languages, a skill that had made them valuable to their captors, but also gave them the ability to communicate with rescue personnel from different backgrounds. The breakthrough came when 9-year-old Tommy asked a question that broke Rodriguez's heart. Sir, if we go with you, will our friends here be okay? The administrators told us that if some children leave, the others will be punished to teach them not to be selfish. Rodriguez realized that the children's resistance wasn't just about their own conditioning. They had been taught to see escape as an act of betrayal against the other victims. Their captors had weaponized the children's natural empathy and turned it into another chain that held them in place. Tommy, listen to me very carefully, Rodriguez said, looking directly into the boy's eyes. My friends and I are here to take all of you to safety. Every single child in this place is coming with us. No one will be left behind, and no one will be punished. For the first time since Rodriguez had arrived in the medical section, he saw something that looked like hope flicker in the children's eyes. The possibility that they could all be rescued together began to break down the psychological barriers that had kept them compliant. Elena seized the moment and began speaking rapidly in 3 different languages, explaining to each group of children in their native tongues that this was not a test or a trick. This was a real rescue operation conducted by people who understood how dangerous their situation had been and who were committed to getting all of them to safety. The change in the children was immediate and dramatic. The older victims who had been restraining younger children suddenly began helping them prepare for evacuation. Maria, the 14-year-old who had been most resistant to leaving, began organizing the group and making sure that everyone understood what was happening. Rodriguez's radio crackled with updates from other parts of the facility. Team Charlie had successfully evacuated 18 children from the main holding area, but they had discovered that the facility was larger than Elena's intelligence had indicated. There were additional sections that contained more children, including a nursery area where the infants born in captivity were being kept. Alpha Leader, this is Charlie Team. We have a problem. The nursery section is guarded by women who appear to be long-term victims rather than hired security. They're protecting the infants because they believe we're here to harm them. Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly, understanding the complexity of what they were dealing with. The facility had created a hierarchy of victims, with some of the longest-term prisoners taking on caretaker roles for newer arrivals. These women genuinely believed they were protecting the children from harm by preventing their rescue. Elena's voice came over the radio with a solution that demonstrated her deep understanding of the facility psychology. Charlie Team, this is Elena. Tell the women in the nursery that Dr. Kozlov has authorized the evacuation due to a medical emergency. Use his name specifically. They have been conditioned to obey any direct order that comes from medical authority. The strategy worked. Within minutes, Charlie Team reported that the women in the nursery were cooperating with evacuation procedures and helping to prepare the infants for transport. But Elena's use of Dr. Kozlov's name had an unexpected consequence. It triggered recognition among some of the older children in Rodriguez's group. "Elena, where is Dr. Kozlov?" asked David, a 12-year-old boy who had been in the facility for 18 months. "If this is a real evacuation, he would be here to supervise our medical preparation." Rodriguez saw Elena's expression change as she realized that some of the children were beginning to understand that their captors were no longer in control. For children who had been conditioned to see their captors as protectors, this realization was terrifying rather than liberating. "Dr. Kozlov is at the hospital preparing for your arrival," Elena said carefully. "He wants to make sure that you receive proper medical attention after your trip to the outside." It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. Dr. Kozlov was actually in FBI custody, providing information about the facility's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. But these children needed to believe that their transition to freedom would be supervised by someone they trusted, even if that person was actually one of their abusers. Rodriguez's team began moving the children from Medical Section 3 toward the evacuation route, but progress was slow because several of the younger victims were experiencing severe anxiety about leaving the only home they remembered. Elena stayed close to the most distressed children, providing constant reassurance and translation when they reverted to their native languages under stress. As they moved through the facility's corridors, Rodriguez began to see the full scope of what they were dealing with. The underground complex was much larger than anyone had anticipated, with sections that Elena had never been allowed to access. Some areas appeared to be designed for manufacturing or processing operations that went beyond simple human trafficking. "Alpha Leader, this is Bravo Team." General Hayes' voice came over the radio. "We have secured the main entrance and detained 4 facility personnel, but we've discovered evidence that this operation has international connections that are much more extensive than we anticipated. This facility appears to be one node in a network that spans multiple countries." Rodriguez realized that their rescue operation, as important as it was, would be only the beginning of a much larger investigation. The children they were saving had been part of a system that was far more sophisticated and widespread than anyone had imagined. But those concerns would have to wait. Right now, his priority was getting traumatized children to safety and beginning the long process of helping them understand that they were truly free. The evacuation of Medical Section 3 took nearly 2 hours, as each child had to be individually coaxed and reassured through the process of leaving the only environment they had known for months or years. Elena's presence was crucial. She was the bridge between their old reality and their new one, the person who could speak their languages both literally and figuratively. As Rodriguez's team emerged from the cave entrance with the last group of children from the medical section, he was amazed by what he saw. The temporary treatment facility that had been established in the woods above the cave system looked like a small city. Medical personnel, child psychologists, social workers, and federal agents were working together to process nearly 60 rescued victims. But the most remarkable sight was the children themselves. Despite everything they had been through, despite years of systematic abuse and conditioning, many of them were beginning to smile as they realized that rescue was real. They were helping younger children, translating for rescue personnel, and slowly beginning to express curiosity about the outside world. Sarah Chun was there, having been brought from the safe house to help with translation and reassurance for newly rescued victims. Rodriguez watched as she approached a group of children who were her own age and began explaining in simple terms what to expect in the coming days. "The food is different on the outside," she was saying to a 10-year-old girl who had been born in the facility. "There's so many different kinds, and you get to choose what you want to eat. And there are colors everywhere. The sky changes colors during the day, and there are these things called flowers that are just beautiful for no reason except to be beautiful." Rodriguez felt tears in his eyes as he listened to Sarah describe a world that these children had never seen. Her own rescue had been the thread that led to this moment, and now she was helping other victims understand that freedom was not just possible, but real. Elena Petrov stood beside Rodriguez, watching the organized chaos of the rescue operation with the expression of someone who had achieved something she had thought was impossible. "You know," she said quietly, "I spent 2 years planning this operation, but I never allowed myself to believe it would actually work." "What made the difference?" Rodriguez asked. Elena pointed to Sarah Chun, who was now sitting cross-legged on the ground while surrounded by a circle of younger children who were listening intently to her descriptions of school, libraries, and playgrounds. She was brave enough to tell her story even when no one believed her. And you were smart enough to listen even when everyone else had given up. Rodriguez watched as the last children were brought out of the cave system. Medics were checking each victim for immediate health needs, while psychologists began the delicate process of assessing their emotional and mental states. It would take months or years to fully understand the extent of the trauma these children had experienced, and even longer to help them heal. But they were free. For the first time in months or years, they were breathing fresh air and seeing natural sunlight. They were no longer property. They were no longer numbers. They were children again, with the possibility of futures that extended beyond the walls of an underground prison. Agent Foster approached Rodriguez as the last of the children were loaded into medical transport vehicles. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. And so does every investigator who dismissed Sarah Chen's story as fantasy." Rodriguez shook his head. "The important thing is that we got here eventually. These children are safe now. And the network they were part of, that's going to be a much bigger fight." Dr. Kozlov's intelligence suggests that this facility was connected to operations in at least 6 other countries. "We've broken one link in the chain, but the chain itself is still intact." Foster nodded grimly. "One battle at a time." As the convoy of vehicles carrying the rescued children disappeared into the distance, Rodriguez reflected on how the entire operation had started. A 12-year-old girl on a highway at 3 a.m., telling a story that seemed too incredible to be true. A story that no one believed until someone finally listened carefully enough to hear the truth hidden in the details. Officer Mills joined Rodriguez and Elena as they watched the last medical vehicle disappear around a bend in the mountain road. "You know," Mills said, "in 12 years of police work, I've never been part of anything like this." "What do you mean?" Rodriguez asked. "Usually, the best we can hope for in cases like this is to arrest the bad guys after the damage has already been done. But today, we actually got to save people. We got to interrupt the horror while it was happening and give these children a chance at normal lives." Elena smiled for the first time since Rodriguez had met her. "Normal lives? I had forgotten that was possible." 6 months later, Rodriguez received a letter that made him understand the true impact of their mission. It was written in careful handwriting by Maria, the 14-year-old who had initially resisted evacuation from the medical facility. "Dear Mr. Marcus," the letter began, "I wanted to thank you for helping me remember that I am allowed to make choices about my own life. I'm living with a foster family now who tells me that it is okay to be happy. I am learning to read books that are not about following rules, and I'm discovering that there are many things in the world that exist just to be beautiful. I still have nightmares sometimes about the underground place, but Dr. Williams says that is normal and that they will get less scary as time goes by. She also says that I am very brave for choosing to trust you when trusting strangers felt dangerous. I wanted you to know that Sarah-chan visits me sometimes, and we talk about what we want to be when we grow up. I think I might want to be a teacher so I can help other children learn about all the choices they are allowed to make. Thank you for believing that we were worth saving. The letter was signed Simply Maria, not number 23. Rodriguez kept that letter in his desk drawer, along with the official commendations and media coverage that had followed the rescue operation. But it was Maria's words that reminded him why some fights were worth the risk, regardless of the odds against success. The girl they doubted had been telling the truth all along. And because someone finally listened, 57 children have been given back their futures. In Rodriguez's experience, there is no victory more complete than that.